Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for day two of Bridges to Success Equity Week webinar series. My name is Jerron Vale, Missouri Department of Higher Education Workforce Development Research Analyst in the Office of Post-Secondary Policy. Thank you for coming. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Once again, all attendees have been muted upon entry, so please keep yourself unmuted throughout the please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. This presentation was pre-recorded. The panelists will be available for live questions and answers at the end. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll use that during the question and answer session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our webpage. Also, because of the number of people that have been accessing the webinar throughout the week, we may experience some technical difficulties, so please bear with us if we have any issues, and we'll try to work on those during the presentation or before we post them in post-production. Without further ado, we can begin the webinar. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Governor Mike Parson, and I am pleased to welcome you to the opening of the Bridges to Success Equity Webinar Series. Today's webinar marks the beginning of Equity Week, where educators, advocates, and thought leaders from across the state will address equity issues in Missouri higher education. A college degree or certificate provides individuals with the knowledge and skills they need to be successful in today's ever-changing workforce. But more must be done to give all students the opportunity and support they need to go to college. That's why I'm proud of the work the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development is doing to help make college more equitable for all Missourians. Through events like Equity Week and critical research reports, we're bringing to light a number of places where we can improve as a state. As governor, nothing makes me happier than to hear the success stories from my fellow Missourians, along with the grit and determination Missourians are famous for. I hope you will learn a lot from the Bridges to Success series and use that knowledge to make a positive impact on our future. It is an honor and privilege to be the 57th governor of the state of Missouri. May God bless you, and thank you for having me here.
Hello, my name is Angelette Prichett with Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. Our equity project began a little over a year ago with a vision for addressing inequities and educational disparities for Missouri citizens. The department's desire is to build a careful process for addressing inequities and to show our commitment toward equitable outcomes for all Missourians, aligned with our vision to empower every Missourian with the skills and education needed for success. The Building Bridges series is an informative look at how Missouri's colleges and universities and community organizations are addressing equity. We hope that you learn from these shared experiences, and we thank you again for joining us.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Kiona Sinks, and I'm super excited to be here for the virtual, Equity Summit on behalf of my friends here in Jeff City. Thank you so much to the team here and to you all for your service. Teaching our kids during this time and just the COVID-19 and what we've all kind of had to go through over the course of now 6 months. And so again, my name is Kiona Sinks, Civic and Social Innovator, and better yet known as a community advocate, and want to get into that. But before, just wanted to set the tone to just really talk about the importance of what we've all been able to witness, right? A lot of things that we've experienced over the past 8 months, it has more so brought forth existing problems that we already knew existed. And so we have an opportunity as leaders, teachers, co-workers, friends, family members, to take this opportunity for this conference and to really take something away that will ultimately go back to our communities and change people's lives and also ours. And so I'm so grateful to be here in front of you. And just like many of you, the kids that you have an opportunity to serve, whether that's college, middle school, high school. At some point, I was one of those kids. And my journey starts at Columbia, Missouri, Hickman High School. Just like most people, you do the whole extracurricular activities, you run track, you get to know those teachers, you're going from class to class, and then this big question comes up that every student in America gets asked: where do you want to go to college? And for most people like me, if you grow up how I grew up, single parent household, not knowing the day-to-day and what the future has to offer, that question can somewhat be so intimidating, because when you don't come from the means, or you have the resources to make college a reality, right, where it clouds the judgment of it becomes less about where I'm going to college and me getting my education, and more about how am I going to get the money and the resources and the connections to make that dream come true. And that's where I found myself. I found myself contemplating, that junior year, that ACT prep and all those different things, and test scores, and allowing those things to be a determining factor whether or not I was worthy to make that transition. But ultimately what I learned, it was more so about the people in my life and educators who saw the potential in who I was as a person and what they saw ahead. And so my time at Hickman High School was groomed and cultivated by a counselor who said, hey, Kiana, if you want to go to college, here are these few things you need to do to make that transition a reality. And I said, okay, Miss Wren, like, what do I need to do? And she said, well, first and foremost, we need to start looking at some scholarships, and we need to start seeing, like, what are you eligible for, and start having you apply to see what's out there. And she said, secondly, we need to figure out, like, where do you want to go to school? And asking me all those tough questions about financial aid and my living situation and all those things. And so I feel like for me, it was a very stressful time in my life, because for me, you're wanting better. Like most students now today, we know the importance of college and what education does to create other opportunities to elevate us in society. But not having the means and resources and to do that was very challenging. And so I found myself really the last year of being in Hickman High School, pushing forward and filling out every scholarship application that I possibly could, and meeting people. Because as we tell people now, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And that was my golden ticket. It was community leaders and people who invested in my past that created my present. And I think that was so critical for me to make the decision. Graduation comes in 2014, and you make that leap and say, hey, I want to go to Central Methodist University, and it was golden from there. And so when I made that decision to go to college, it was a start to a very interesting journey that I don't regret looking back, because I would not be sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for that experience. And ultimately, you pick Central Methodist, Fayette, Missouri, and culturally in Midwest, we know we have some challenges and how that looks. And I think for me, it was, how do we not only go to a college, right, and grow and learn and just get all of that and what it has to offer, but also be transparent with just who I am in that process and what is right for Kiana, what's right for me. And so a mentor said, hey, this is in the wake of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and you're sitting here at this college campus, you're going back and forth to other cities, and you're seeing culturally what you should be doing. And so at the time, I'm a freshman, I'm wanting to eat ramen noodles like most college students. Trying to obviously still taking in the fact that you're the first in your family to go to college. A lot's riding on this to finish, complete, with the anxiety of financial hardship and just other things that come with that over time. Because if it was a challenge getting there, it's still a challenge continuing it and making sure that I saw that process through. And so the last thing on my mind was, what did I want my legacy to be at Central Methodist University? You know, I wanted to just run collegiately, get a degree, and be out of there. But God had other plans, and those plans were me implementing and founding our school's African American Student Union. And that changed my life, right? Because when we look at where we are today now, the catalyst of George Floyd is allowed us to not only look inwardly at our own lives, but kind of really start evaluating, you know, our workplaces and relationships and things that we're invested in externally, internally, and where do we stand when it comes to our values and our morals. And so I was having to do that at 19 and helping my school, not only with my peers and other students, but with President Drake and a lot of executive leadership at Central Methodist and our board of directors, our board of trustees, and so forth. And through that experience, you find yourself not only growing just yourself, you find yourself just really being in the midst of changing a campus that, now looking back, I didn't understand, but it was pivotal for many students' lives culturally to have an experience that represented who they were and reflected other students over time that I was there at Central Methodist in the 4 years. And so it became, for me, a purpose and an imprint that was my it at Central Methodist, and how I wanted to enrich the lives of not only Black students, but students of color, and to make sure that they had a place that they felt comfortable. And it wasn't easy. It was very difficult. You know, as students, most things that we don't tell our adult peers and people who've helped us get to where we are in life, and we deal with so much, right? Because even to this day, the stakes are, if not higher, much higher than they were, you know, looking at peers and mentors that have been there and done that. And so you find yourself just really in this place where it's necessary, but it's so difficult. And we know that when you're the first to cultivate and found and start and take that next step and that brave step to put yourself out there in any capacity, it's very difficult. And so doing that superseded my expectations. I thought, hey, this is just an organization. It's just going to be here at the school. And little to my knowledge, you know, 4 years go by and you start seeing students' lives change. You start seeing teachers and professors and community in Fayette externally outside of the college rallying around this cause and this champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And not that we were perfect, not that we didn't have things all figured out, but I think the first step was trying. And it was giving a student a voice and an outlet to create a reflection of not just myself, but other students, that I think is so important today as we look at equity and how that applies to diversity and inclusion. We talk about diversity a lot, but the inclusion piece is so critical as we look at different capacities of making sure we all have the same seat and the same voice that's being elevated at the table. And so I graduated with honors and was able to meet some amazing, phenomenal people, and took away most values that we all know. You get your friends in college, your lifelong friends in college. You find your purpose, is which we hope, and those things remain true. And my journey continued on and landed me in Kansas City today. And all things I'm known for is a social and civic innovator. And everything that I have done and put my foot in front of has literally been me championing this model of how young millennials, Gen X, the whole nine of us upcoming should be perceived through an equity lens and in our communities. And I think my story alone just shows grit, perseverance, and not allowing circumstances and the hardships of life getting in the way of what we can achieve. And so there are so many students like me, and I was able to, as well, have President Drake and a lot of executive leadership at Central Methodist open that door financially for me. Make sure that my college experience wasn't just me making it to campus or me graduating. How am I exceeding beyond that? And so I think for me, yes, it's my responsibility to fulfill the expectations and go to class, not skip class, and make those good grades and fill out those job applications. But as we see, we can do all those things, and sometimes kids are not given the same outcomes, or young adults. And so with those opportunities and how this equity conference is allowing this space for leaders across our city, across our states and your communities to look at where you are and to look at where I am today. And there are so many students and young adults across Missouri who need the same opportunities, a place to grow, a place to express themselves, and leadership to know that diversity, equity, inclusion is not a statement, it's in our actions. Long term, these things are important. We see them today and how they show up in our workplaces and how they're able to change students' lives. And so I think in the midst of my story and how I've been able to not only just get an education, but come out so full of feeling enriched and having just a robust experience of knowing not only who I am and getting an education, but who I am to my community as a servant leader. And so thank you so much for watching this, for listening to me during this time. I hope the Equity Summit is something that you all are taking part in, and knowing that listening to my story, and as we continue over the next couple months and ending 2020, that there are so many young adults who are needing that opportunity to not only go to college, to not only make it through high school, but to have that experience to see in action opportunities of what happens after education. Education is the number one thing that we want, but we also want that student to leave those four walls of that place of a college and be whole-rounded. And so my name is Kiona Sinks, and thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that this message has served you very well, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Well, hi, Kiana. I am so glad that we have this opportunity to sit and talk. We're going to have this socially distant fireside chat, and I'm sitting here with Miss Kiana Sinks. And then after we have our chat, that will be followed up by a live audience question and answer session. So again, good afternoon, Kiana, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm really excited to talk to you just about your path, where you've been, where you're going, what you're doing right now. Kiana is with Diversity and Inclusion at Elevate Consulting and describes herself as a social and civic innovator and a cause-driven equity leader in the Kansas City metro area. We are really excited to spend a little time getting to know you and to talk to you on a more personal level. And so thank you for taking that drive up here to meet with us today. I would encourage everyone who's listening to please reflect on the foreword that was written by Ms. Kiona Sinks. If you have not already, it's included in the beginning of the Missouri Higher Education Equity Report that was released yesterday and is located on our department website. As you think about equity in education, I also want you to think about students like Kiana who maybe have that drive and that motivation, but just haven't found that person, haven't found that one person, that one special mentor who's able to kind of show them the way to success. What can we do as higher education professionals? What can you do to help shape the future of the students that we work with? So with all that in mind, I've got just a few questions for Ms. Sinks. So, Ms. Sinks, what is a social and civic innovator and a cause-driven equity leader? What do you do?
Yeah, in short terms, first and foremost, thanks for having me here today. I'm super excited that we were able to have this fireside chat, this considering all things with COVID. But I refer to myself as a social and civic innovator because what drives or what has driven me to be so successful in my relationship building, community advocacy, and that's been done through civic initiatives. That's been built through a lot of just championing efforts community-wide. And being able to do that, you have to be social, you have to get out and network, you have to get out and build relationships with people to make sure that you're able to not only grow, but just to know like what's here, like what's happening in the community. And so that's why the social and civic innovator has been, I think for me, a part of not only my life, but just in summing it up, like you're an innovator who socially motivates and who can connect the dots and make those things civically happen.
Okay. Well, right before we started recording, you were telling me about your brand new job. It was a little waylaid because of COVID, of course, kind of like everything has been put off. But you were talking about you're now working for the Negro Leagues in Kansas City. And do you want to share just a little bit about what you do there and maybe how your experiences have shaped like who you are currently?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm so grateful to have the role at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. As we sit here and do this fireside chat, it's a message that reigns huge, not only in Kansas City, but America, preserving the history of baseball, black baseball for that matter, that is really a civil rights story, but just through the lens of baseball. And Buck O'Neil, who is sitting in the the state capitol, such a huge ambassador for not just what it means to be a steward of learning how to play the game, but just a steward of servant leadership and overcoming perseverance. And so being at the museum, like you said, it was supposed to happen in March, but as we all know what happened in March, right? And so it got put on pause, but taking this role as a community engagement manager, it's just really to amplify the message and connect the dots and to ensure that most kids probably don't even know who Buck O'Neil is. Most kids don't know that they see baseball today, you know, with black and white athletes, but breaking that down, building community relationships with, making sure that people, educators, corporate entities, the whole nine can see a place for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum to be a steward of help support through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion right in Kansas City.
That's awesome. Well, I'm very happy for you, and I wish you well in your endeavors. You know, you mentioned something as you were just discussing your new job, and you talked about kind of engaging your community that you're in and kind of helping to shift the culture. Can you, I'm going to sneak a question in that I didn't have on our sheet, but can you talk a bit about how you did that? You know, you talked a little bit about Central Methodist when you were a student and how you reached out and really kind of engaged that community when you were there. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Like, how did you do that? Like, if I am a student and I'm in a brand new area, on a brand new campus, and I don't know anything, how do I start? How do I begin with that? Like, how did you start?
Yeah, I feel like for me, my background in community has always been that, right? Like just surrounding myself with people like yourself who are looked upon as, what can I take from that person, right? Big or small. Number one, a student or educator who's watching this that could help a student is I was challenged, for one. I was brought out of my comfort zone to say, hey, Kiana, here's what your college is doing for Black History Month, but here's what you can do, not necessarily to override it, but to enhance it, to make it better. Because you are a woman of color, you know people who look like you and the challenges that they face and what education or what maybe little things that as a college student or any student should learn during that particular time on a campus. And so for me, it was number one, being challenged. Number two, I had to at some point get away from that mentor and develop my own relationships with students, professors, not my professors that I never had of the 4 years at Central Methodist, because those professors are serving on committees or finance committees, or they're making those decisions about budget allocations and what club is doing what. So it all ties into, oh, like I see Mr. Mark all the time, but I don't have him for physics. Like understanding value, and I don't need it when I need it, you always need it. So that relationship and cultivating that, not when it's time to use it, but when it's necessary, just to know, like I need to know who you are at any given moment, because I might need to pick up the phone and call you. So I think the value in just, you know, being challenged, developing relationships on your campus, and then that leads to number 3, because you learn through that, what are the needs? You know, every college campus is different. It's not the same, but the framework of having a culturally rounded experience, all students need that, whether you're in Texas or Missouri. So I feel like getting to know like your leadership, that's gonna look different for a lot of people. Those things are challenging. Those things don't happen overnight. Those conversations between me, president, provost, whomever, board of directors, or seeking out mentorship, that was a lot of moving parts that stretched me. It grew me. It was uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, because you are a student who, in the great scheme of things, go to school, get your degree, and just stay in your lane. But not boxing myself in and saying, I want more than just an education here at Central Methodist University. I want to be able to go here and see not only myself improve, but people of color who experience challenge internally from just belonging. College is already hard enough, right? Just getting there. So it's not just getting there. It's like, what do I do when I get there? And that's a whole nother conversation, but it's just so many different things that I feel like not settling, you know, and challenging yourself, surrounding yourself with mentorship, understanding your college campus and your dynamics. What are you passionate about? I started my African American Student Union. For you, it might be a completely different total initiative, but it's the drive, right? It's the just getting out there. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know everything. The bylaws that are probably still there to this day were bylaws that you talk to other people at other institutions and say, hey, we're trying to start this. What did you do, right? Not being afraid to ask. So I just feel like a lot of basic things that we talk about all the time. Communication is key, mentorship, you know, stretching yourself, asking the tough questions. Like, I learned that at a very early age, but really when it really counted because people were depending on me and there wasn't a lot of time for mistakes, but having the grace and being able to have leadership, people like yourself who make those spaces for moments of growth for students, I think is so critical, because then we're not afraid to fail. And I think that's what allows us to say, okay, when yes, there's pressure, yes, there's expectations, yes, I have responsibilities, but I can be authentic, I can be vulnerable, and I can be myself. And through that, not having this traditional lens on what success means in college, it's changing. And I think for me, I was just so fortunate to be at Central Methodist in those short years. And even though it was through the African American Student Union, it allowed me to, I think, touch a lot of people in ways that I don't think if I would have not done that, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about this experience. And I've been afforded many, many, many opportunities because of that. And that was almost 4 years ago. Now, a lot of things, of course, will grow and you'll experience other things, but that was the catalyst for my awakening. And so who's to say what that will be for a student today?
That's amazing. You know, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned, which kind of leads me to my next question, but you really mentioned higher ed leaders or administrators or whomever kind of creating space to allow students to kind of be their authentic selves and to succeed and to fail. So can you talk a little bit more about that? What can higher education faculty or administrators do to create that atmosphere, create that culture that's conducive to students standing up and being more demanding of equity on the campus, creating that culture of respect for diversity and equity, but also allowing that space for students to be able to verbalize what they need.
Yeah, it's just like I think of this in a lot of different things are running through my mind, but some things are just not optional. And I feel like we pick and choose, and we see it during this time now, where when we don't apply those metrics, and not metrics from a numbers, but those values and, yes, it's diversity, but where is the inclusion? Where is the equity? What does those things really mean? Then we lose part of, well, why are we even here? And I think, to me, in order for administrators, higher education in any capacity to really start understanding the dynamics of affordability, of access, I know you, but many people would love to know you. You get what I'm saying? Like, just the power of being able to be associated to particular people, that goes a long way. So I think it's really, yes, there's the college and it's going to go get a degree and it's fulfilling all those requirements. And for students like me, we get that, because guess what? We did that in high school. We persevered that. We superseded that. So the question isn't, can we make it through? It's, what are the tools and the requirements, such as, is financial aid allocated fairly? And what are my financial obligations? When this student gets here, how are we supporting them long-term after orientation week? Because those things are still challenges once, parent weekend or freshman day and all these different things. And there literally needs to start being and hiring of cultivations of leadership where that's their sole focus on college campuses. Literally hounding first generation college students. We're checking in, quarterly, semesterly, weekly, whatever that student needs, because it looks different for everyone. But I feel like if we want success in equity, we have to make sure that we're consistently giving all students the capacity and the access that they need. And that's going to look different for multiple reasons, right? Because people are different and we're dealing with different situations. But we don't know those things if we don't have someone that's there to communicate those needs effectively and who have those real authentic relationships. Like, my counselor in high school would have never even known I wanted to go to college. She was very instrumental in me saying, hey, like, this is what I can do, this is what I can do or cannot do. But because I had those walls broken down and I saw her not Hannah Wren with a suit and tie, it was, we had coffee, we did those things outside of school where, like we talk about today, networking, right? But it's just that relationship building capacity. So I feel like we need more of that when it comes to education in our colleges, when it comes to just, far as just like some type of cultural, cohort, right? Like we're just like us, MBA programs. We need a cultural program, and I'm not saying call that, but but we just need something that enhances the growth culturally that is internal for students. Because I think me as a Black woman and growing up and maneuvering through college wasn't never questionable. Was I going to graduate? It was, are people around me, do they understand me? Like, do they get my experience? Do they understand that maybe the reason why I don't have books is because I couldn't afford them? Just all those different things that we just don't think about, that is like literally a game changer for any student's success and makes the world of a difference. And so if higher education and people who are in capacity of decision making in any kind, it's like, we just saw executive orders say we don't need to enforce D&I, but I would encourage everybody to still do that because it's needed. And if we say we care about students across Missouri and our country, then we definitely need to enforce framework culturally that enhances the success of all students, and including me.
Thank you. So if I'm a student, how do I engage with higher ed administration to talk about equity? So if I'm a student on a campus and I think there's an issue, or even if there isn't an issue, I just want to have a discussion, how do I open that door? How do I just put my foot in and just get started?
For me, it was just sending an email. It was that one text that you keep reading and you don't hit send. It was so uncomfortable, but I look back at that moment, I'm like, man, what would have happened if I would have never sent that email to President Drake? I'm sure it was uncomfortable for him too. That's the thing we don't talk about. I didn't know it all. I'm in boardrooms and meetings and budget meetings and talking about all these different things that I have no clue. There's no template for founding an African American student union at a school. Now, once you have one successful one, possibly, but the template stays the same, but the metrics and the conversations and personalities and what that looks like and how that's allocated, totally different for any campus. So I think for me, it's just understanding the fact that you're never not gonna be ready to have that conversation. It's just a matter of just doing it. It was so uncomfortable for me. And once I sent the email, what it does is it allows that person to read that, whatever communication is, before it's face to face, and just take that in, but it opened the door for the conversation to eventually having that sit down like you and I are doing and having that conversation. Because I could pick up so many different things through an email or a text, but at least I was able to, from a very competent person who would say, man, this is a student, and what student sends emails to their professor, introducing themselves the first week, saying, hey, my name's Kiona Sinks, taking your class this semester, looking forward to this is what I want to do with my life, and I know your class will help me get there. If I'm 1 out of 3 students that do that, that teacher is going to pay attention to me probably much more than many other students. At least that did for me. Those are things that I wasn't thinking about. A mentor taught me that. I'm like, why do I need to send an email to this teacher? I'm probably never going to talk to them ever. But it worked. It worked. And when I needed that teacher or that administrator or anything, they were like, oh yeah, Kiana. So it wasn't this awkward, I never met you, and I'm not saying you have to do that, but it opens the door for not just grade conversations. It could be something much bigger that is way over a grade, but it impacts that. But you need to go talk to not the professor, because maybe he doesn't have the last say so. So I think it's just a matter of getting uncomfortable, to have the capacity to just say, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. And once you're afforded the opportunity to have the conversation, being honest, being truthful about equity, understanding whatever you're approaching that person in leadership about, that you feel confident in communicating, your feelings and maybe the lack of, right? Here's a solution, here's a problem, here's a solution. And asking as a student, what can I do to push or help you as a leader of this school and such and such. And I think that helps, because what that says to me, if I'm a person in leadership and I have a student approach me, it's here's not the problem, or here's not what's happening. It's here's a problem, but here's a student on our campus that sees our day to day and who's a leader, because a leader identifies and sees the issue, and typically they have solutions. And I think understanding that and realizing that, at least for me, was so life-changing. But also I was responsible, right? Once I sent that email, I was like, all right, here we go.
You open the door.
I opened the door. So when you open the door as a student, just be ready for whatever that comes with, right? So I wasn't even going into this thinking, oh, once I send this email, I'm good to go. It was like, no. Once I sent that email, it was like, all hell broke loose, really. In a good way, though, right? Looking back, I'm very blessed that I was able to have that experience. But I think us as students, especially now with social media and how we use Twitter, just everything's at our fingertips. And what we say has power, and that's great. But I don't think our generation fully understands that once we articulate those things, just be ready for whatever that is. And I'm learning that. I'm not perfect. And I'm having to say, all right, make sure when you say this, you can fulfill, or if they ask you to do this, you can do that. So just making sure that once I voice my concern, there does come a follow-up to that.
Right. And you're speaking about that follow-up, so I want to kind of follow the follow-up because I sense you have a lot of energy around this and around this topic, and that is so awesome. But what do you do with the naysayers? Because there's always that contingent who's either this isn't an issue, or this isn't an issue in my world, or this isn't something that's even serious enough that merits a whole conversation about. Like, how do you handle naysayers? Because I'm sure you've run into a few along the way.
Yeah.
So how do you handle when people are either denying that there's an issue, or just kind of, it's not my responsibility, you just take that on and you deal with it over here?
What we see is when we don't deal with stuff, even as like what adults have taught me, and sometimes I find those same adults that are teaching me are sometimes the very ones that aren't taking their own advice, is problems don't go away. So those things that are articulated, if you disagree or for whatever reason you just don't like me, that is completely fine, because guess what we're given in this life? We're given the right to feel how we want to feel, and what we want to say, we can say. I think for me, nobody knows your life more than you do. My happiness is not dictated on someone else, professionally or personally. And I think for me, and especially speaking from a place where, my grandmother growing up, we have this conversation all the time. It's like, when I was growing up, the stuff you saying, like, my grandma would not be okay with that. And I'm like, it's not necessarily a disrespect. I think what we're seeing is I'm not gonna take a chance on not articulating what's true and what's necessary. And so with that comes, maybe for me, at least in my experience, things that I say or things how I walk out and necessarily sometimes don't say, to your point, people do have a problem with. And I think for me, and I'm still learning this, well, if people are having problems or there's naysayers, then you must be one step closer on their heel. And I think, what is life without them, right? Because it's gonna happen. But we do know for people who say, that ain't really for me, or, I'm not gonna really worry about that. Those things come back. I've seen it in professional capacity literally I have a real-time example of someone who, like they say, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Now, it wasn't for me, but it's like, man, like, these are big opportunities, but when we don't get it right the first time and then something big happens, let you get it right then, at least do all you can. So that way, moving forward, we can at least say, hey, like, let's revisit that. But, oh yeah, there's been growth, or there's been these 3 different things that have taken place where we feel comfortable, having this conversation or rekindling these things. I'm learning that, being careful with what I say, how I do those things, because how we treat people, how we do things, how we facilitate our thoughts and how we feel and how we outwardly express that, it shows up in a lot of different areas that sometimes we can't fake, at least. And I'm not saying don't be yourself. I'm not saying don't be authentic, don't be true to you, but there are some capacities when you're wrong, you're just wrong. Then there are some times when you're right, and walk in there too. But I think we're in a space now in our society, especially with considering all things and what we've experienced with COVID-19 and social unrest in our society, there's no middle anymore. You're either on the right or the left. And people are making decisions around those things. And so whether you get impacted financially as a business owner because you believe in a particular view, then that's your right. But the outcome and the decisioning play and how people choose to move, be ready for that, right? And then there are also some positive things that come with people doing the right thing. We've seen that. And so I think for me, there's always going to be people that are going to talk, they're going to say things, but I have to do what's best for me. And I think if I were to really, like, me and you would take that in every single day, like, I'm sure there's somebody that thinks, like, you should be doing this about your life. I'm sure people, especially me, think I should be doing half of the things that they've gave me advice about or whatever. But what's best for me? What makes me happy? That's where I choose to live my life, at least.
All right. Well, I thank you, Kiana. This has been really eye-opening, and like I said, I just really appreciate your being open and honest and forthcoming about your thoughts and your feelings about equity and where we need to be in higher education and really in life. I had a quote that I'd written down from Nelson Mandela. It says that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I am just really looking forward to working with you and, you know, to ensure that we're doing really all that we can to educate students, to support students, and to help make meaningful change, not only in their lives, but also in the lives of others. Because, you know, what we do, the groundwork that we set, is going to continue to impact students. And it's going to continue to impact those who come behind us. Yeah. It's either going to open doors or it's going to close doors. And so just kind of working to do all we can to make sure that when we go through a door that we leave it open for that next person to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Kiana.
All right, thank you for staying with us. Wonderful presentation. Thank you to Ms. Angelette Pritchett and also Kiana for the video and the conversation. I think we have Ms. Kiana with us. We do have a couple of questions and comments, so we'll get to those. If Ms. Kiana, if you could unmute yourself to answer a couple questions. We'll start with the first one. In the presentation, it was stated that it is not only what you know, but who you know. How do we get underrepresented students connected to the right people in the right positions to give them opportunities like the ones described in this webinar?
Yeah, just thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and thank you all for listening to the Q&A and just overall being here present today virtually. I think it's so important. We always talk about in our spaces in professional capacity, we're networking, we're making sure we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's. And so transferring that over and making sure that wherever you work or whatever professional capacity you're involved in, setting out a template and being intentional on if there is a close school nearby or just some type of professional group that can man connecting successful adults to us underrepresented students to have those opportunities real time, I think does a huge difference. And I know that in the great scheme of things, it wears on our time. We're robust in our schedule. We don't have a lot of room. We're busy with meetings, but understanding that that student seeing you at your desk and that student having that half a day in the office or whatever the case might be, or that 15-minute coffee goes a long way, Jerron. And so I think it's on the next generation and present to ensure that we reach back to make sure students have proper social capital, right? Because we see that's important, and also just learning and connecting with leaders in their particular communities.
That's great. Somebody also made a point to that, to piggyback off that, your experience of having a high school counselor really made a difference in your life. So having, like you said, having those opportunities for people to reach back and help others is what's greatly needed across the state, is what the person in the comments said. So thank you for that. We have someone else who has a two-part question here. What factors could we encourage with students, extended family, to create a similar foundation for other young people so that they can be successful? And also, as mentors, what should we be doing to assist our mentees?
Yeah, I think mentors right now, especially, I kind of mentioned prior to early on in the chat that, you know, right now with how we're all trying to realign normalcy in a sense of a place that we all have never been before, we see that human connection is so important. And so really what mentors should be doing right now, students still need to be prepared to go to college here pretty soon and getting ready to graduate and all these different things that will not stop. And so really having those conversations, if depending on where you are, if you are a mentor, you know, asking those things, checking in, having those, I like to call them the untailored conversations, things that I didn't like to talk about, that are hard, that maybe they're not thinking about. But if you're not a mentor and if you're wanting to get into that space, you know, just reaching out to a colleague and asking if they are aware of other opportunities for you to immerse yourself in a particular, young adults' life. And so I think mentors right now should literally be inwardly asking themselves, what can I really give, not tangible, but intangible, the things that, we talked about in this webinar, that's around equity, especially underrepresented students across our state that aren't given fair opportunities just based on zip code and where they live and so forth. And so I just think it's up to mentors to really dive just in a little bit more. I know we're all like going through COVID, we're working from home, we're exhausted because we still have responsibilities. But I think it still lays on us as we see education being one of the most impacted things with COVID-19. It requires all of us to do the work. So.
Thank you for that. Next question we have is, as someone who mentors students and someone who has benefited greatly from mentorship, how do you get students to take advantage of the opportunities you have to offer? For example, I share scholarships, internships, and et cetera with my students, and only a few, if any, apply, even if I offer to help them with the applications. Any experience with that?
Yeah, I would say, what is that particular person's relationship with the students? Students are only going to invest in something and open up and be authentic and take that initiative, at least for me, in having that relationship with that primary mentor or a person that's offering that opportunity. I think once, especially in today's world, once a kid or young adult is able to see value in something, that only comes from having prior to a relationship for you to be able to get through. And maybe you already have a relationship and they just really are like, hey, we're just hot potato. We are young. We're just trying to live life and just go to the next thing. But I really think it's really breaking down to them, hey, like, this is not a right now decision. At least that wasn't for me. When you're just trying to survive and you're just trying to, make those decisions to get you currently to college and you're not even thinking that way, or, we're about to enter to freshman year and you're just trying to, get the money to try to get the things you need for your dorm. Some of those things are just far-fetched and mentally you're just not there. But I think when you're having that relationship and trying to work those different angles about, hey, this internship's important, it's going to give you this experience, you need to do it. And students need to take advantage of that because in the great scheme of things, yes, people can have opportunities, but it is our responsibility to see that. And so hopefully a relationship with that particular student makes a huge difference when a mentor is presenting such opportunity.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question is, was there any form of support you feel like was desperately missing, either in high school as you prepared for the future or in college, that could have made a difference for first generation students who may be less resilient than you?
Yeah, I would say what's desperately needed, I've mentioned it in the chat, orientation goes and figuring out the first generation college student experience goes well beyond orientation week. And so I think the next step is for our state is to really start taking initiatives at our college campuses, hiring, if it takes hiring those particular people, that's literally all they focus on, is putting emphasis on first generation college students even in high schools, having focus groups, meeting with those students individually, making sure literally we're dotting our I's, crossing our T's, depending on what school that kid wants to go to. It might not be a 4-year institution. It could be a trade or a 2-year degree or some type of something to where everyone is kind of all hands on deck and really giving a little bit more TLC with students to develop them, not just in checking off things to get ready for college, but like we talked about, having social capital, developing those relationships. I think looking at high school, that's one thing that Hannah Wren, she did for me very well. We sat down and went through those little small things, but made a big difference when a college recruiter is asking you for documents and some of us have no idea what they're talking about, to be really honest. So those things to adults might seem like, oh, okay, yeah, like, because they're not asking you. But for a student who is the first time looking at financial aid, they got to ask mom for tax documentations. It can be a lot. And so I think we just really need to start across the state of Missouri
in our communities, really getting people who are invested in students that could potentially overall invest in first generation college students.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you for your response. Really appreciate that. I believe that's all the questions we have. I don't see any more that have come through the chat. I want to thank you, Kiana, for Ms. Kiana Sinks for joining us and through the Q&A and the wonderful webinar you put together, and also Ms. Angelette Prichett as well, who was able to help us out as well. So I thank you to you both. Thank you to the team for OPP, and really appreciate it. And so tomorrow again, we'll have another Bridge to Success webinar. Hope you will be able to join us at 12 p.m. And thank you so much again, Ms. Kiana. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good one. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.